We are live, ladies and gentlemen, live on the air with me, Max Sinnenberg. Once again, we're back with Joe Baldwin. No Ty this week because of travel plans, but this week, really because Ty isn't here, Joe and I will be ranking our top 15 MCU films. They will go from 15 to 1, and then at the end of both our rankings, we'll stay on for a Q&A as long as you guys are watching. Please remember, if you guys also watch this live or via the replay, to hit that like button and to put in your questions in the comment section down below as well. I'll answer them once this film is over. But we want to get started fast. So, Joe, we're going to bounce back pinball way, 15 for me, 15 for you. We'll go back and forth. So, Joe, tell us your number 15 MCU film.
All right, I'll go 15. And I just want to, I'll throw this out there. We just talked about this. We're not doing honorable mentions because 15 through 11 are kind of our honorable mentions. So my 15 is Doctor Strange, which is a movie that I really liked when it came out. I loved the special effects, and I thought it was really interesting because Marvel had never introduced its magic system. And as a comic fan, which is going to come up a lot more, I don't know a whole lot about Doctor Strange, but I've talked to my brother, and he's informed me that Marvel's magic system is awesome. So I'm really looking forward to seeing more of it. Anyway, I really liked the movie when it came out. Unfortunately, it's just not one of the ones that immediately comes to mind when I think of my favorite Marvel movies, because it's just so removed from everything else, which it's getting better. It's integrating. Doctor Strange has shown up in Ragnarok, Infinity War, Endgame, but he still feels like this entirely other entity. Like, he saved the world and nobody cares. Like, nobody knows, nobody cares. So there's not that connection with the rest of the universe that makes so much of Marvel so compelling. So I would love to see more Doctor Strange in the MCU, but for right now, it doesn't spark the same level of interest when I think of it. So it's my 15.
Yeah, it's been weird. That film's been like mixed bag for people. Some people really love it, and some people are in the middle. I mean, it's just that type of film. For me, my number 15 is Avengers: Age of Ultron. Some people have this in their bottom 5, but I find there's a lot less quality MCU films than Age of Ultron. I still don't think it's like an amazing movie or anything. I still think, though, you have a great cast back from the first one, and you add in, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, and you add in Vision, and it really helps the film. One of my favorite sequences in MCU is really the party scene in the first act, where they're all at the Avengers headquarters, and that's where kind of Ultron comes into it. I find it hilarious, like Don Cheadle's joke that he keeps, Rhodey's joke throughout the whole time, and no one's laughing, but he thinks it's hilarious, like, always gets me. But Ultron was a bit of a disappointing villain, I would say. He's really intimidating, but the problem is I don't know why, but because I guess Jarvis is inside of them, they try to make Ultron funny at times, and he's kind of like cracking jokes. And it kind of takes me out of the movie when he's starting to make jokes, because Spader has such a great voice for him that you don't need him to be like jokey or anything. You just need him to take himself really, really seriously. But because of what is happening, I think it's a pretty weak, pretty disappointing villain, especially what we were promised in the trailers, how menacing he was. He really wasn't that in the film. And Sokovia was a little too ridiculous with the whole city in the air. But for me, it's still a fun enough movie. Like, I still enjoy Age of Ultron. The jokes work, but Ultron was just way too disappointing for me. Joe, move into your number 14 here.
All right. At 14, I have Black Panther, which might surprise people, but it's similar to Doctor Strange, which is I really like it. I think it's an interesting movie. It's something that Marvel's never done before. They create this amazing world. I rewatched it for a history class for one of my senior projects, and I had a great time like coming up with interesting things to talk about it. But again, when I think of my top Marvel movies, it doesn't immediately come to mind. I do like Chadwick Boseman as T'Challa. It's a great cast, and the Black Panther was actually one of my favorite characters from before like any MCU stuff. Mm-hmm. But again, it is such a removed character, and to be fair, it makes it higher than Doctor Strange because Black Panther already has his introduction in Civil War, but the whole story is a Wakanda story, which is really interesting. It's not necessarily a superhero story. It's more of like a king, a family dynamic, which is a great story. I keep saying story. But as someone who really likes the structure of superheroes, there are just some parts that are lacking for me. Killmonger, I love until he becomes evil Black Panther but evil, and that's a mistake in a lot of Marvel movies that they're getting better at. But it makes the fight a little less interesting because they have the same power set, and it really just turns into a fist fight with vibranium. Yeah.
But yeah, the MCU, like a lot of our movies that we might not even have could be top fives or number ones for people. Just that's what MCU kind of is. My number 14 is Captain America: The First Avenger. I really nostalgia for me as well for this movie. Evans is amazing at this character, and I think I really only get them for this movie. As she, the end game tie up at the end was just amazing, and that works because it's easily up to you. He goes and just you have as a lot going on as well, but for me, the main issue with the plot, point of this absurdity, we basically montage our way through and takes out of the movie at times. We just wanting to fast forward to the main plot of the movie. Him actually in action instead of just in highlight form. For me, Captain America: The First Avenger is a really good opener to the MCU. Into Cap's character, but that franchise, the Captain America trilogy, does a lot better with the character than this. So, Joe, you want to keep going on here to number 13?
Absolutely. I feel like I should just get this out of the way. I'm having some connection issues on my end, so I was not able to hear a lot of that. So hopefully it'll improve, and I hope you can hear me. My 13, another one that I think makes a lot of people's top 10 is Guardians of the Galaxy. I really like Guardians of the Galaxy, and again, it's something that Marvel does, and it's new, and it's throwing you into a whole new world. It's so impressive, especially because it's a team-up movie where all of the characters are introduced in one movie, which is a lot harder to pull off than the Avengers having each character have their own movie of build-up. It's a very funny movie. I love the cast. Chris Pratt as Star-Lord. Dave Bautista as Drax. I'm not going to list the whole cast. They're great. Again, this is a very reoccurring thing with my 15 through 11, which is just, it's a movie I like, but it doesn't strike me when I'm thinking of Marvel. Because again, they're so removed, and that works, and that's totally legitimate, which is they're introducing a whole new section of the Marvel universe, and that, not everyone in the galaxy would know about the Avengers. But I just, I don't know. I really do like the movie. That's why it's so hard to make these types of lists, but I just don't remember it as well as I remember some of the other movies. do not know what's going on here.
I'm back. Sorry. Had some technical issues. Sorry.
Was that on your end or my end?
That was my end for some reason. Even though I am connected to my internet, I don't know why it's not working for me. But
all right,
I'm back now. Hopefully we're good for this. Sorry about that. So you were talking about Guardians?
Yeah, I finished up.
Okay.
Great movie. Just not one that I personally connect to.
Yeah, sorry about that. So we're on number 13, Joe, if I'm correct.
Yes, 13.
So let me just find my list again. All right, number 13 for me is Doctor Strange, which is your number 15. I really enjoyed Doctor Strange. Benedict Cumberbatch, in my opinion, is one of the better working actors today in Hollywood, and I think people say he's too much of a jerk in this movie, but that fits. He can't just be Tony Stark, where he's like a jerk, but is it funny enough where you care about him a lot? I think he's a very completely different jerk than Tony is for the majority of the film. I think the problem with this movie is that the villain's super weak. Caecilius, for me, is one of the worst villains we've gotten so far. And it's a great actor, too. Like, Mads Mikkelsen is a great actor, but they kind of wasted him. The Tilda Swinton storyline was also interesting, as her as the ancient one. But I think it also sets up a really interesting, the second one's obviously going to be a huge movie because it's the Multiverse of Madness, but they set up Mordo, I think his name is, Chiwetel Ejiofor's character, to be the villain for the next film, even though he was kind of the sidekick, and then you see the end credits scene, he's kind of already becoming the next villain. So that kind of storyline really is fascinating to see for the next film. As Joe perfectly said, it doesn't really connect to any of the MCU. And I think that Doctor Strange was actually the best in Infinity War than his own movie. So that also, and I mean, it's a good movie, but and it's so beautiful to look at. Like, some of the action set pieces are there that are just really good. But for the most part, it just with a really weak villain, you don't really feel like our superheroes in that much danger. And you're also trying to learn about an Infinity Stone at the same time. So there's a little too much going on in a weak villain for me. But it's still a really fun MCU movie. Moving into our number 12s, Joe.
I'm not sure how this one's going to go over.
Oh.
My number 12 is the Winter Soldier.
Wow.
Yes. Okay. So
Ooh.
Captain America is one of my favorite characters in the MCU. And I did some rewatching here. I really like his arc all the way through. All of his movies, he has really great characterization. The Winter Soldier, great movie. It does one of the things that I love about superhero movies, which is it is the superhero genre. It's got Captain America, Black Widow, the Falcon, but it is also something else. Superheroes can be thrown into all of these different circumstances. And in this case, it's a spy movie. And I love my fair share of spy movies, but for me, the Winter Soldier, I like it, but I'm going to talk more about why I have it so low, because I think a lot of other people have it higher on their list. It's a little too dark for me. Because there's so many movies in the MCU that do such a good balance of like the joy of superpowers and superheroes and the actual seriousness of trying to save the world. And that's something this movie is really all about. The darkness, the corruption of S.H.I.E.L.D., which is an amazing sort of twist, the twist that Hydra's been growing inside of S.H.I.E.L.D. But for any Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. fans out there, they kind of know that this movie destroys so many working plots. It is a huge event, and I feel like it's not this movie's fault, but I feel like the handling of how, like, the impact of the destruction of S.H.I.E.L.D. is just not well handled, and they kind of move past it, which is important in a movie that is a self-contained story. I'm talking a lot. The other problem I have with this movie is Nick Fury, who is one of the most maddeningly inconsistent characters in the MCU. And you can ask me questions about Nick Fury later, and I will talk about my opinions, but
wow.
It's a great movie, and I don't deny that. but I'm going off of what I personally just really like to see.
Yeah.
No, and also this video would not be any fun if Max and I both had the same lists.
Exactly. That's why I'm so fascinated, because we never even talked about what our favorite movies are together ever, and this is fun to find out.
Well, I never really.
You have Winter Soldier, Black Panther, and Guardians all outside of your top 10, which is really fascinating.
Yes, I do.
Yeah,
it's really insane when you say it like that.
Yeah. My number 12 is the first Ant-Man. Ant-Man for me is probably the most underrated film in the MCU. Paul Rudd is just like perfect. Like, you never really think he could be a superhero until this film happened. In general, the movie is really fast paced. The Falcon cameo is awesome. And just that reveal that he's actually at Avengers headquarters and not, old, whatever. Hank Pym's connection to the Starks, and the opening scene is basically him being fired by Peggy and Howard Stark. Really, in the opening scene, is really fascinating to watch after you've seen the first Avenger. Really, in general, the movie is so fast paced. I would have liked to seen Hope be in the Wasp suit in this movie, but I'm perfectly okay with it. Yellow Jacket for me is a little too familiar of a villain that we've seen in this franchise in the MCU before. He really rings close to Obadiah Stane in the first Iron Man. The fact that he's kind of trying to take over someone else's creation, and then he becomes basically the same character at the end. But the fight with him and Ant-Man in Ant-Man's daughter's room has some great comedy bits, and also just really worked and took itself really seriously at times. And Michael Pena steals the whole movie as Luis too, with the fast-paced jokes and the flashbacks. It's really a funny movie. Just to spoil it, Ant-Man and the Wasp is not in my top 15. This movie, the villain for me, there really isn't a villain in Ant-Man and the Wasp. And it was just, it felt like such a safe movie. This movie did feel very different from what we got, like a heist type of film. And I feel like that's what the MCU needed, just such a different genre in the franchise. So we're about to head into our top 10. Before we do that, number 11 for Joe.
All right. I'm glad that you just talked about Ant-Man, because I have Ant-Man and the Wasp at number 11.
Oh, okay.
I remember it's one of those films. It's similar to Spider-Man Far From Home, where it comes out after Infinity War and has a very weird sort of place in the MCU, which is we just witnessed this cosmic level event, and now we're talking about Ant-Man. But yeah. I love Ant-Man. Paul Rudd is fantastic as Ant-Man, and just the movie in general is hilarious. Randall Park as the FBI agent who's checking in on Scott throughout the movie. I do agree with you. The villains in this movie are just kind of weak. You have the crime boss and you have the ghost who's just misunderstood. And while that can work for a villain, I feel like they hammered it home so much that she's not the villain. She just needs this to survive, where you don't ever really think is like, oh yeah, she needs this. Yeah. But besides that, I love the set pieces, the shrinking and growing cars, the chases. Ant-Man is one of my favorite superheroes in the MCU. I think he's pretty underrated. Great comedy, which is distinct enough from a lot of the other comedy going around in the MCU. Not totally different, but distinct enough.
Yeah.
I do think the lack of a strong villain is keeps it back on my list. But I love the film. It had a lot of energy to it, and that's something that I really enjoy in an MCU film.
I see your point. For me, I'm not really a fan at all of Ghost. I felt Ghost was wasted because she had such a cool powers, but she just misunderstood. Just felt out of not necessary for this type of movie, especially when you have to bring back Ant-Man's. The first original Wasp back from the what do you call it? The
Quantum Realm.
Yeah, the Quantum Realm. So
that was really the plot of this movie, which was trying to bring back Janet Van Dyne, and then having events sort of happen and distract them from that goal.
Yeah, I mean, there was, Sonny Burch is in this movie, played by Walton Goggins, and didn't really feel necessary other than just have someone just to add another plot to the movie. But yeah, I see your point.
Yeah, and I will say not every superhero movie has to be end of the world.
Yeah, exactly.
I think something without a villain, it's not the greatest, which is why it's so far back, but I think there's room to grow there.
Yeah. No, I see your point. I'm going to talk about a type of movie like that later down the line here. My number 11 is Black Panther. Yes, it's not in my top 10. It was when I first watched it, but on rewatches, it declines for me. But it's still a great movie, in my opinion. Do I think it should be nominated for Best Picture? Probably not. But I still think amazing messages, as Joe said earlier, just one of the best casts in a solo movie that we've gotten in an MCU film. Ryan Coogler, is one of the best directors I think working today. And it's probably one of my favorite MCU scores too. Ludwig Göransson won the Oscar for the score. It's a brilliant score that I listen to still to this day. Killmonger is easily a top 5 villain for me, but a character that doesn't get talked about at all that I love is Ulysses Claw, played by Andy Serkis, who I think steals the first half of the movie. Because Killmonger is really in one scene in the first act, and then he kind of pops in and out, and then really is there in the third act. But Claw is the main protagonist in the first half of the movie, and he's hilarious while his character is so important in the MCU because he basically, the world thinks that he stole all of Wakanda's vibranium. That's so interesting. But for me, T'Challa is kind of bland in this movie, in my opinion. Black Panther. It seems like he was kind of overshadowed by way more entertaining and likable characters. I think he was much better in Civil War, Infinity War, and even in Endgame because of the way he goes off of the Avengers. But here, he seems kind of bland. You're also kind of not rooting for him because Killmonger's kind of right in this movie, but Killmonger's just an extremist. I mean, Killmonger's right the whole time, and he's so right that Black Panther, he changes the MCU because then it opens up Wakanda to the world. Especially in that post-credit scene, which sets up Infinity War. But I think that he's kind of a little too bland for me. And the third act is really bad, in my opinion. I think the first 2 acts are like great, and it easily would be in my top 10. But it just turned out to, as I said earlier about a Yellow Jacket, it's just Killmonger in a Black Panther suit fighting Black Panther. And the CGI isn't that good in the third act. The fight scene isn't really a fight scene. They're just standing next to the train, and we're just seeing them talk to each other. I found that super weak, and that should have been the main focus. But I actually wanted to keep going back to the fight, with Okoye and M'Baku and that type of stuff. But instead, we kept going back to talking with the train involved. So for me, that just completely runs down the film for me because I really love the first 2 acts. But for me, the third act is really one of the weaker in the MCU. But now we're going to get into our top 10 here, unless you want to add on, Joe.
I would love to add on. First, I just want to say this so no one brings it up in the comments. Claw is the main antagonist.
Yeah, antagonist. Correct. Sorry.
No problem. You were going so fast. But yeah, I think your point about the third act is what brings it back so far on my list. It's when your villain is your hero but evil.
Yeah.
Killmonger is great up until that point, but then when he puts on the, I believe it's the Golden Jaguar suit.
Yeah, exactly.
And CGI armies don't always work. If you do it well, there are interesting shots to be made, but the rhinos, it's a lot going on, and it's sometimes hard to follow. All right, so now we're getting into top 10. So for me, 10 is Avengers. First Avengers.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's not what started the MCU, but it's definitely what made the MCU what it is today. A cinematic universe. It's all of these people from different films coming together like a TV crossover, but a movie. To my understanding, it had never really been done in this way before, and it's put together so well. You've got your main Avengers. You do sort of you don't have backstory films for Hawkeye or Black Widow, but it doesn't totally matter. Like you get them in other prior movies. I think the dissension among the team is really important especially just being realistic, which is all of these heroes want to do the right thing, but they have such different reasons and ideologies behind it. Like you have Tony Stark, who's a hero, but his reason for being a hero is so different from Captain America's, and the way they interact and work together demonstrates that without making them compromise their ideals. I think it's the Avengers. It doesn't make it farther on my list just because I would like to believe that it gets better. Like they started from a point, they got the Avengers and they kept going and they made even better things that outshine the original Avengers. And I think it's great. I do think Loki is a good villain, but he's a confusing villain because, you know, he just keeps coming back throughout. Like they really leaned heavily on Loki for most of like the early MCU. And as opposed to Black Panther, I think the CGI army in this case really works because as the world's real introduction to the Avengers, it needs to be a big threat where a small team of people is actually taking on something that nobody else could. Yeah. So Avengers is my number 10.
Good point. My number 10 is Spider-Man Far From Home. The latest MCU film, which came out right after Endgame. I really loved Far From Home. I heard a lot of people complain about this film, and there are flaws with the film, but I love it to death because Tom Holland is the best Spider-Man / Peter Parker that we've gotten so far live action form. Mysterio is a really tough villain to pull off. And yeah, there are issues with the character throughout the film, but you got to understand how tough of a character that is to pull off in live action form. And Gyllenhaal seemed like he was having such an amazing time, just a fun time playing the role. And yes, the scene where he basically is in the bar and he basically reveals his whole plan is super cheesy and isn't a good scene. But for me, it's more watchable than for some people because he's having such a blast doing it. Like it seems like he's loving playing the role. And I love when I see actors in that type of way. I think it's the two best end credit scenes that we've gotten. Because really the movie is completely different if you don't watch the end credit scenes. Because in the first one is that Mysterio basically reveals that Spider-Man is Peter Parker with J. Jonah returning. And then you have Talos, who's my favorite character from Captain Marvel, is actually Nick Fury. And that was a great twist because he was kind of acting weird the whole movie. When you watch it I've watched it 3 or 4 times now, twice in the theater, and you can kind of see where he kind of is different. Because, for example, Maria Hill is calling him Nick the whole time, but we found out in Captain Marvel that no one calls him Nick. So you can just kind of find some ways, which is really fascinating to rewatch. But yeah, some of the issues, Mysterio's character, you can see it coming a mile away. Sometimes you don't understand why Iron Man would give this probably the most important device in the world to a kid at times. But Happy is the best Happy that we've gotten from Favreau so far. I really love the movie. And I see why people have some issues with it, but for me, it outweighs it with an amazing cast and just a fun enough story. And that's why it's in my top 10.
All right. Number 9.
Yes.
Oh my God. Every time I'm saying one of these things, I just feel like people are going to be mad at me. I have Civil War at number 9.
Oh.
Here's the thing about Civil War. I loved it coming out of the theater. I thought it was one of the greatest MCU films coming out of the theater. I was like, it's awesome. It has these amazing action sequences. It has it's still a Captain America movie, but it has all of the Avengers, which really helps with the integration, which is that after they come together, they don't just like go off and do their own solo thing until we need a new Avengers movie. My problem was that the more I thought about Civil War, the more it just became so hard for me to ignore the idea that it's a plot so specifically constructed in order to make the heroes fight. And do not get me wrong, I love seeing superheroes fight. They're some of the most awesome action set pieces that you can have in a movie. But Zemo is so confusing and hard to, like, when I watched it in the theater, I didn't care as much because the airport battle scene. The airport battle scene is amazing.
Yes.
And honestly, it could have made it further up my list. Like that scene alone could have made this movie go further up my list. If not for Zemo's weird plan. It's just so complex. The Captain America and Iron Man fighting and having it be such a significant rift and then also fixed like within the next couple movies very easily. I don't know. It feels definitely like a comic book movie, which is it's a big event, heroes fighting. They wanted people to pick a side. Which side do you think is right? But then wants to return to the status quo. It's again one of those movies that doesn't want to necessarily investigate the impact of what it caused. I think Civil War is a movie that probably makes a little bit more sense after Endgame, because I think they caused a rift in the Avengers right before one of the most impressive crossovers in Infinity War. Mm-hmm. I don't want to talk about it too much. I can't believe that it's so low on my list, but just the more I think about it, the more I'm like, the plot as opposed, like the action is great, but the plot doesn't always land for me.
Hey, it's fair. My number 9 is the First Avengers, which is what your number 10 was. Not Captain America, the actual Avengers, the first team movie. I had a lot of fun with the film. It for me was always actually in my top 5, but the more years pass on, the more it kind of slipped. It doesn't look as good as the other films, for sure. But for me, it still works because of the intro on just bringing the team together is so great. You know, Black Widow recruiting Hulk. Thor comes out of nowhere, and that first fight between Thor and Cap and Iron Man was really good. Loki is such a fascinating villain that you learned a little bit in the first Thor, and he becomes a much better character in this film. The way he exposes our characters, and you really understand why they're fighting with each other. I mean, it's not just because there's a thing there, just because they have issues with each other, and the Cap and Iron Man tension really begins in this movie as well. Hawkeye is a bad guy for most of this movie, and that was really cool to see, in my opinion. And then you get to that third act, and it's one of the best third acts, I think, in the MCU, just in New York, the Jatari army versus the Avengers was really great. And then you get Thanos in the end credit scene, where you really know that there's some bigger plans down the line. And it looks like a completely different Thanos than we got in Infinity War, but he's still in there in the end credit scene. I just love this movie. Fury, this is the best Nick Fury, in my opinion, as well. But it's a fun movie. It isn't the best Avengers movie, which I'll get to down the line, but that's my opinion on it. Your number 8, Joe?
My number 8, Far From Home. I don't know why I paused. I don't know why I feel the need, like I think everyone's going to criticize me for my list. Far From Home, you talked about it a lot. It does have its problems, but when I watch it, I just have such a good time. And even the Mysterio twist, which you can see coming miles away. You know Mysterio is one of the most famous Spider-Man villains. But I don't think that really matters. I mean, for people who don't know it's coming, it's a shock. But some twists you don't need to be, it doesn't need the audience to be surprised. It just needs the characters to be surprised, you know? So Mysterio does an amazing job convincing Spider-Man that he's not a villain, and then reveals himself to be a villain to the audience. And Spider-Man doesn't catch that for a really long time. So I think that idea, like, oh, we could see the twist coming, is like, that doesn't bug me as much, because Mysterio, honestly, this movie is so high up for me just because of Mysterio. I think he's an amazing villain, and I'll talk about this in a lot of my other higher ranked things. But Mysterio versus Spider-Man is incomparable when you're talking about superheroes and superpowers. Spider-Man's powers aren't equivalent to Mysterio's powers. They're different, and they have to be utilized in different ways. So Mysterio plans things out and uses trickery, whereas Spider-Man uses instincts and acrobatics in order to fight. And I think having such different characters, like having a hero that's so different from the villain, is amazing. I think the idea that instead of having a fighter, a leader, and like a director as the villain is incredible. Truly, Far From Home is one of my favorites because of Mysterio. But again, Tom Holland does a great job. Marvel doesn't do a lot with like the little guy, you know? Like a lot of their movies are so big and grand that sometimes you forget about the regular people. And Spider-Man is such a good example of how regular people, like all of Peter's classmates, have to deal with all of this destruction too. And Peter has to really comprehend how to keep his identity secret, which is not something a lot of, like, there's not an identity crisis in a lot of the other Marvel movies, because they're like, Tony Stark comes out as Iron Man, Thor is just Thor, and Captain America is a war hero. Also, the end credit scene makes me wish that we were getting a Spider-Man 3 so much sooner. I was originally going to have this behind the first Avengers and like move Avengers and Civil War up a peg, but truthfully, when I just think of Far From Home, I smile, and I think that deserves to be farther up on the list.
Yeah. It might be controversial, but my number 8 is Iron Man 1. Now, it's not my top 5 for a lot of reasons. For me, though, in general, I'm going to have a very similar take with Black Panther. In the reason of I love to death the first 2 acts. But for me, that last fight scene is really poor, in my opinion. That might be controversial, but I hate the fight between Ironmonger and Iron Man in that last scene. There's no tension. It's kind of a huge plot hole in the understanding of why does Obadiah Stane need Tony Stark if he could just build it by himself? Because he basically just built the suit by himself. And it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But for me, the first 2 acts are so great. Downey's introduction. Downey is just, in my opinion, the best casting in the MCU. And without this movie being so great, and I still think it's a great movie, I'm just saying that's my opinion. Without this movie being so great and how great Downey was and how great of a direction from Favreau, we wouldn't be having the MCU. And you got to take that into consideration. And then to get that end credit scene with Nick Fury basically saying that setting up the Avengers is so, I get nostalgia for it. But for me, it's easily the best Iron Man film that we've gotten by a lot, in my opinion. And I still think that it has, and that will just spoil my top 10. Obviously, 2 and 3 are not in my top 15, but Iron Man for me is still a really fun movie. Pepper is better than ever, I think, in the first Iron Man. I still prefer Don Cheadle a lot more than Terrence Howard as Rhodey. So that sometimes pulls me out of the movie because I'm like, that's not my Rhodey. But still, really great movie, a great intro to the Iron Man, and a real risk move starting out with a character that not a lot of people are familiar with. So that's my number 8. We're closing in here. Number 7, Joe?
Number 7, I have the original Iron Man.
Yeah.
I feel like I need to provide some context. I watched the MCU in a very weird way because I didn't start with Iron Man. I started with Captain America, and then the first Iron Man movie I watched was 3, and then I watched them backwards.
Yeah.
But I actually recently watched Iron Man, and I think it's great. It's truly, you do have to give it credit. It started all of this.
Yes.
And once again, RDJ is basically Tony Stark. It's such an excellent mold of character and actor. You really feel like everything he's saying is just what Tony Stark would say. You never feel like he's being written for.
Yeah.
Which I believe hearing that Iron Man didn't actually have much of a script when it was in production. I think another thing it does really well is it mixes the more grounded part of being a superhero with this sort of like joy, like him learning to fly. That's always something. If a superhero is not enjoying the first time they're flying, I find that insane, because I think I would enjoy the hell out of being able to fly. So his slow build up to the actual Iron Man suit, which is grounded in reality, and then you then as you progress, you get to like the crazy Iron Man suits with the nanotechnology. I really, so it does a great job. It has like a very serious, his Tony Stark's motivation is about weapons manufacturing, and that's really serious. But then also you have like his character so easily ties into, why he would make the suit red and gold.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. It doesn't make it further up my list just because, I don't know. I think I agree with you a little bit, which is, evil Iron Man at the end. I don't hate the third act. I probably have it one slot higher than you just because I think two Iron Man suits fighting can actually work, and the difference in size helps in order to just distinguish them a little bit. Yeah, I also feel very comfortable I'll also just spoil it. I don't have either the other Iron Mans on my list, and I feel comfortable saying that because our good friend is not here.
Yeah. But yeah, that was my major issue with Iron Man 2 is that Whiplash just turned into evil Iron Man at the end of the movie, which was dumb as well. So my number 7 is Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, I really love this movie, like really do. But for the mostly it's because of Vulture. Michael Keaton is my favorite actor of all time, and it's my second favorite MCU villain. And I think it's the best Spider-Man villain in live action that we've gotten before, for a lot of reasons. He is such he's not trying to blow up the world. He's just doing things for his family. Like, you really understand. He gets screwed by Stark in the opening scene. And you understand where he's going. And then the huge twist of him being Peter Lunvich's dad came out of nowhere. I think everyone who watched the movie for the very first time was shocked, and I was stunned. I couldn't believe that's what was happening. And then you get to that. My favorite scene of the whole movie is that car scene. It's so, you feel the tension that Peter is so screwed, that his girl right now is basically giving away everything and revealing that he is Spider-Man. And the more you do that, the more the music kind of pulls up, and he's already pulling out. It's so great. Peter as well, like the little short film that he does in the first act from his point of view of Civil War was hilarious and gets me to laugh every time. And he just feels like a kid more than Spider-Man Far From Home. Like this movie, that's the one thing about Spider-Man. He's a high schooler, and I don't think we've actually gotten a Spider-Man who looks like is in high school and is with kids who are also in high school. Like everyone looks like a high schooler. Peter has high school issues. He's on what do you call it? He's on the team. What do you call it? Where he's going? The spelling. Yeah. That. He's doing a lot. He was in band, and also Tony Stark is in it just enough, in my opinion. I didn't want this to be a team up movie where just Iron Man helps Spider-Man and everything. I like that Spider-Man needed to learn that the suit isn't who he is. It's got to be Peter first, then the suit. And that was a good lesson. Now the action scenes aren't the best in the MCU, I would say. And that's the thing that pulls us back for me is that the last scene on the beach isn't that exciting of an action scene. Vulture just punches him twice and then tries to leave, and his suit kind of blows up. I would love to see more tension in the action. The tension was there just in like the dialogue itself, especially in the car scene. But for me, I wanted a little more tension in a better fight scenes throughout the film. But I still love this movie, and I love both Spider-Man and Vulture. So we're moving into number 6 now, right?
Number 6.
Yes.
Number 6, I have Captain America: The First Avenger, which was my first MCU film. It's what introduced me to Marvel films, because I'd been such a DC Comics guy for a really long time that I didn't know a lot of these characters. It really is a build-up in order to introduce Captain America for the Avengers, but I don't dislike that. I think Captain America, it does a great job showing you Captain America and also explaining why he's such like an altruistic hero. I really enjoy Chris Evans throughout the entire movie. His origin, I didn't hear a lot of your explanation when you were talking, just because connection issues. But I do agree. There's like the montage is not great. I wish we could have seen like a little bit more of those like moments fleshed out. But the slow buildup, which is he wants to be a hero, and the problem is not that he's reluctant. I'm not a huge fan of reluctant heroes. It's that he is he's just being stopped, and he has to. It really tests his morals, and he shows that he really cares about this issue. The scene where he's like a propaganda figure is actually, I think, a very fun idea, which is like that's sort of what Captain America would be. Like that kind of cheesy, like, oh, I'm Captain America. I sock old Adolf Hitler in the jaw. And then it slowly gets into him, like the scene where he goes off to rescue the prisoners. I really enjoy that whole sequence of events. Especially, I am a sucker for makeshift costumes, because I think it's like you have to realistically create a costume first before you can go out in like the actual stuff. It was my introduction into all of this, so there's a good amount of nostalgia there. Red Skull's not the greatest villain, and there are certain problems with why Captain America had to freeze himself, but I can forgive that just because I do really enjoy it.
Yeah, no, a lot of people. I do love the movie. My number 6 is Ragnarok, Thor Ragnarok. So to spoil that, my least 2 favorite MCU films are the first 2 Thors. I really hate the first 2 Thor movies, especially Dark World is really bad. Thor 1's kind of whatever, pretty forgettable. This movie for me really changed Thor as a character for sure. It gives him a full 360. And it's the best Thor. I mean, that just made Thor so great in both Infinity War and Endgame. And it's such a great movie. His relationship with Loki for me is the best in Thor. And that makes you spoil Infinity War. It makes you care for Loki's death, because Loki and Thor get on better terms. Doctor Strange even gets a cameo here in Ragnarok. Hulk is in the movie, which was, I think, the best Hulk that we've gotten. Just the mix of Banner and Hulk is the best in this movie, in my opinion. And some great new characters. Valkyrie, who I'm so pumped to see in a lot of other movies. I'm a big Tessa Thompson fan. As well as Jeff Goldblum is really good in this movie as well for the small amount of screen time. And Korg as well. Taika's own voice. Korg makes me laugh every time. But Hela, for me, is actually a pretty underrated villain. It's one of probably I could be wrong because Ghost isn't a villain, but really the only female villain in the MCU. And she kicks a lot of butt in this movie. I mean, she kills a lot of people. She killed really the whole army, and she almost kills Thor. They were kind of hinting that Thor would lose his eye in the movie, but when it happens, it really works. It's so violent too. Hela doing that. And then Hela's death is awesome. Like, so satisfying that, Ragnarok happens and that's how she dies. Like, it's so awesome. And the fact that Hela is a relative of Thor really elevates the movie too. You have more personal things. Odin dies as well in the movie. There's a lot of Matt Damon even gets in here as a cameo when he's portraying Loki. It's just hilarious. Taika for me is easily one of the better directors working in Hollywood. I love Jojo Rabbit and I love Thor Ragnarok. And I'm excited for the next time we see Thor in another MCU film. Before we hit our top 5, we have 10 minutes left. So we might not have enough time for questions, but definitely hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, do all those things. Let's go quick here. Joe, number 5 is...
I can speed through this. My number 5 is Ragnarok. Like, once again, I just have it a place above yours. I can't really put my finger on it. I think you explained a lot of like the great deals about Ragnarok. I mean, Taika Waititi it's basically enough said. Just anything by him is fantastic. It's so funny. I agree. This is probably the best Hulk that we've gotten. Because I mean, we only really get Hulk in Avengers films. Because the Incredible Hulk, but it's so long ago. what was I going to say? Yeah, I think the idea to use like Thor's so much more likable in the Avengers than he has ever been in his own movies. So just bringing that sort of comedic level to Thor and having the other characters really makes it a great movie. I haven't seen it in a while, so I just don't have a lot of specifics to go off of, but I do remember really liking it, and it just being one of the most interesting Marvel movies. Like it takes Guardians of the Galaxy and puts Thor in there, and then also keeps a lot of Thor. It's an experiment, and it totally works.
I agree. It's a very risky film because Thor is a completely different character in that than his previous 4 times in the MCU, but I agree. My number 5 is Guardians of the Galaxy. I love this film. And the reason why it's in my top 5 as well is that it's just a shock factor. I never thought this would work. The only people I knew in this film were Dave Bautista because I'm a wrestling fan, so I knew Bautista. But Pratt wasn't a superstar at this time. And people were. I mean, you didn't really know Bradley Cooper was voicing, Rocket, and Vin Diesel was doing Groot. So at the time, these guys weren't really huge stars. But now, I mean, Chris Pratt, amazing as star. They have amazing chemistry. And in my opinion, this is the only movie that in the MCU that actually nailed Drax. Once they moved into Guardians 2 and then Infinity War Endgame, Drax just became a joke. And in this movie, he's funny, but he also has a clear motive of trying to get Ronan because Ronan killed his family. So Drax he's dumb, but he's also serious. But in the other movies, he's just doing jokes. And Drax to me just always annoyed me after this movie. But in this movie, I love Drax. Rocket is my favorite MCU character. So I love Rocket as well. But the reason why this pulls back is Ronan is a really bad villain, I think. Ronan is, and the fact that they brought him back for Captain Marvel could have elevated this film actually, but he was just wasted in Captain Marvel too. He's in scene maybe 2. And Ronan's just a big guy who's kind of Thanos' sidekick. And we get to see Thanos in this movie as well. But for me, just weak villain. The dance off, if Ronan was that tough of a guy, why would he wait for Chris Pratt to sing? But other than that, I really love this movie, and it's easily in my top 5. Your number 4, Joe, is?
Infinity War.
Infinity War.
It's great. It's truly, I mean, there's so many great actors, and it's hard to get all of them in one place. And this movie melds all of the stories differently. It puts together these sort of unique teams that you really wouldn't have seen in any other setting. I think, but the real thing about Infinity War is that it's Thanos' movie. It explores his psychology, what he's doing, and it makes him one of the greatest Marvel villains of all time. Just because we're trying to run through them, I'll make my points why not further up my list. This is a problem a lot of sequels have, which is they separate the characters that you want to see together. And in this movie, I totally understand, but there are just certain relationships that I would have liked to see in Infinity War. It has some great action scenes. I cannot get over Star-Lord ruining the plan. That's one mistake that always bugs me. I think really the reason that it doesn't go farther is because it's so. Actually, I shouldn't say because that would be a spoiler. It's my number 4. You good, Max? Uh-oh. Can you? Oh, okay. I guess it's just me. What do you want me to talk about while we wait for Max to get back to us with his number 4 in the chat? Oh, he's texting me. What do you guys want me to do? I hope you guys are enjoying this. I guess I could. Do you guys have any questions? I can answer some questions. I see one question, which is what new MCU movies and TV shows are you looking forward to? I like I said earlier, I'm really looking forward to Spider-Man 3. I really want to see more of the sort of littler guy superheroes. I am also really looking forward to Black Widow. I mean, probably just a little bit more now that it's getting delayed because of COVID, but Max is texting me. Oh, okay. Max has told me to go ahead and do my top 3. So let's do it. My number 3 is Ant-Man. This is really weird without anyone to react to my outrageous top 3. Ant-Man, I really like. I mentioned this earlier. Superhero movies do such a good job of combining genres. So they're kind of their own genre, but I really like heist movies, and Ant-Man is a superhero heist movie. It really works. I'll explain a little bit more about my. Max is restarting his computer. So Ant-Man, what I really love Scott Lang, Paul Rudd is Scott Lang, because again, Marvel just doesn't have a lot of everyman superheroes. Like Scott Lang is a regular guy. I mean, he has certain skills from being a criminal. He has electrical engineering skills, but he's kind of chosen it almost random. I mean, Hank Pym chooses him, but there's just something interesting is like the concept that anybody could be a superhero. He's not the most likely candidate. It's a great movie. Really funny. Hello, Max.
Sorry, I don't know why I'm having technical issues. I'm connected to my internet, but there's nothing I can do about it. Where were you? What were you talking about? Sorry.
I had just finished talking about Infinity War. I killed some time, and then I started talking about Ant-Man, which is my number 3.
Okay.
I can just wrap it up. It really is having someone who's not a god or a billionaire or an American hero. You know who I'm talking about. Be the protagonist of a movie. There's also something about the shrinking and growing is such an interesting power that a lot of people think is silly, but it works so well in this movie. They really show you how you can take advantage of a power set. I will admit that Darren Cross is not the greatest villain, but the fight at the end between them growing and shrinking and using small things, using big things, it really is just, it takes you into a whole different world. Like shrinking allows you to see something you've seen 100 times from a different perspective. It's very interesting, and I'm getting really rambly at this point because I've been on a while.
I'll get my 4 and 3 really quickly. My 4 is just like yours, Infinity War. Really love Infinity War. I love that the villain actually wins in the movie. But the reason why it might not be number 1 is because I kind of knew that the superheroes would come back. I didn't really feel that emotional about any of the characters because they're not going to kill off Black Panther after he just made $1 billion. I mean, it wouldn't make a lot of sense. So I didn't have that much. I had emotions for Peter dying because his death is really emotional for me every time. But in general, Thanos kicks Hulk's ass in the first fight scene, and Hulk doesn't come out the rest of the movie, which I thought was so risky but clever, and it worked. But yeah, Infinity War is my number 4. My number 3 is Civil War. I love Civil War, and I just watched it last week again. It's so damn good. Because the reason why I love it is that you understand everyone's motive. You understand why Iron Man would be fighting Captain America, and you get why the other team would be fighting Iron Man's team. Like, you understand everyone's point of view. Kind of Bucky killed his dad. That was super heartbreaking, and you get why they go into that big fight. Yeah, yes, Zemo is kind of a weak villain. Zemo, his plan kind of falls into plan perfectly. Yes, at times for me it is too convenient, his plan working. But for me, I have so much fun with all the characters and the introduction of Black Panther and Spider-Man as well of this movie. And for number 2, my number 2 really quickly is Winter. Always my number 1 until one of the more recent films. Love Winter Soldier. Different MCU films that we've got. Winter Soldier, such a badass villain in this movie, and there's so much emotion because Bucky is there, but Bucky isn't coming out until that kind of breaks down. I guess my favorite Black Widow so far in the MCU. Hopefully her movie turns out really good. But I love Black Widow. The actions are the best, like hand-to-hand combat, CGI in the entire franchise. What is your number 2?
My number 2 is Spider-Man: Homecoming. I think it's a fantastic movie. It's one of the more different movies because it is really reactionary to the rest of the MCU. Spider-Man is really affected by the events of every other movie. The Vulture is, I think, I feel confident saying, my favorite Marvel villain. It's just so great. Michael Keaton does a great performance. He balances, like, you really feel for him, but what he's doing is wrong. It's like it's a perspective, not a justification. He's not saying I'm the good guy. He's saying I'm doing what's necessary in order for me to survive, in order for my family to survive. The twist of him being Liz's father is phenomenal, and he really just does a great job. Overall, he's merciless to the people he's working with, but he also you feel for him. I was talking about this a little with Ant-Man, but I was getting really rambly because I didn't know what to do. Spider-Man being a teenager is great. Spider-Man is actually not one of my favorite characters in the comics, but I really love his movies in the MCU because he's so relatable, and he's a teenager, and you don't get a lot of it's hard to make teenage superhero movies because of casting, and I feel comfortable saying he's the best on-screen Spider-Man. It's just he got the powers. You feel like if you got the powers, you could do something similar. Obviously, he has some scientific background that allows him to make the webs, but it really allows you to think, what if I were in that position? What would I do? The themes of responsibility and power are really cool. And like I said, I am a sucker for uncompleted superhero suits. So the final battle between the Vulture, which is a little anticlimactic, and Spider-Man in the homemade suit is really great. And I think it has a lot of great comedic moments as well.
Yep. And now we got to talk about our number 1s, and they're easily.
I feel like we have the same number 1.
Yeah, that's Endgame, right? Endgame. So Endgame's number 1 for me. It's one of my favorite movie experiences that I've ever had in my entire life, because I was in the theater and I felt like I was watching like my sports team or something, because like I was like shaking the whole third act. I had goosebumps. I was so nervous about what was gonna transpire. Thanos, I love that he gets killed like 5 and then he comes back later. It's 2014 Thanos. But I really love Endgame. Time travel, it works. I know travel movie. So like they understand what they're doing. The Iron Man is super powerful. I think it's the best Hawkeye that we've ever gotten before. And people are like, oh, well, Hawkeye should have died. Hawkeye had a family. He had a wife and kid. Black Widow didn't really have anyone. So I kind of on the side of her dying instead of, because he has a family to take care of. It's super powerful. Little moment here gets me emotional every time. The fact that the whole movie, the only person he cared about that died the whole time. The first thing he says to Pepper is that he lost the kid. He's in his house, he lost the picture of him, and then he actually gives him the hug, which he didn't give him in Homecoming, which was a great callback. So, and it's great Far From Home as well. I'm excited to see Thor with the Guardians. It doesn't look like we're getting that yet, but I really want to see Thor with the Guardians because it makes you crack up, and it's in Endgame too. So congrats to Ty as well.
Yeah, I'll just add some extra points. It's an amazing work of art, I would say.
Yeah,
it's so hard to get that many characters and give them all their own moment. And granted, like half of them died in the last Avengers movie, but then giving them all like the little satisfying action pieces in the end. There are so many movies that are not movies, videos that can just detail all of the small Easter eggs. Time travel is a really weak plot device, but it works so well with this, where you're revisiting old movies, but you're still inventing new conflicts, and you totally understand. Additionally, man, what am I talking about? When they go to the original Avengers movie, they have Shield taking away the scepter, and Captain America uses the Hail Hydra because he has that insight from the future, is a really satisfying moment because it really makes you feel like everything was planned. Even when you kind of know that there are some continuity errors, it really solidifies this as a comprehensive universe, different characters going to different parts. I'll also just to counter Max's point about people wondering why Hawkeye didn't die instead of Black Widow. I understand both sides. I think Hawkeye's point about him becoming a monster and not wanting to be like, he's not the same person he was when he was with his family, was a really powerful thing. And those two different perspectives made that scene where they're battling each other for it really emotional, really important. The final battle is just amazing. I mean, it is a CGI army clash, but you just have like these moments where each hero is doing something that's just so uniquely them, and all in order to stop one snap. And it's such a dramatic moment, but you also realize how crazy it is and how we got to this point. It's insane. And I don't know, it really does make you wonder how they're ever going to top this. And I have hopes that they will, but it's just so well put together. Yeah.
I agree. That is the ranking of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'm blasting this of Joe again. And hopefully Joe can come back as much as he wants to. I'm going to try to keep this all those things. We'll see you next.